This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going back in time to World War II, but not to the battlefields you might expect.
Oh!
Yeah, we're diving into the unexpected social revolution that happened right here in the U.S. during the war years.
Okay, interesting.
We've got a great Spotify episode from Mr. Hutchings History to guide us, so get ready to uncover how World War II reshaped the roles of women, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans.
Okay, sounds fascinating.
It's a story that most people don't know, but it's one that fundamentally changed the fabric of this nation.
You know, it's interesting because most folks know the major battles and outcomes of World War II, but they often miss the massive impact the war had on everyday life here in America.
Right. It's like the war was this giant pressure cooker for social change. I mean, think about it. You're a woman in the 1940s. Your world is probably centered around home, family, kids.
Owie.
And then, bam, war breaks out. Suddenly, the country needs you to build planes, weld ships, even fly them. Talk about a major shift. What caused this sudden upheaval?
Well, with millions of men off fighting, there was a critical labor shortage. Factories and shipyards desperately needed workers, and women stepped up in a huge way.
Wow.
It's a bit ironic because before the war, these jobs were seen as men's work, but necessity forced everyone to rethink those old assumptions.
That iconic image of Rosie the Riveter really captures that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's this strength and determination in her face. But I bet the reality was a lot more complicated than just putting on a bandana and flexing a bicep.
Oh, absolutely. Women faced a lot of challenges. There was skepticism, even outright harassment from some men who didn't want them in these roles. And despite efforts from the National War Labor Board to promote equal pay, women often earned less than men for doing the same jobs.
Really?
Yeah, we're talking about ingrained societal norms being challenged head-on here.
So even with those obstacles, they kept at it. That's incredible. It makes you wonder what was going through their minds at the time.
Well, think about it. For the first time, many women were experiencing financial independence. They were contributing directly to the war effort, proving their skills and resilience. It was a taste of equality they'd never had before, and it planted the seeds for the feminist movement that would explode a couple of decades later. You can draw a direct line from Rosie the Riveter to the fight for equal rights in the 60s and 70s.
Wow, that's a powerful legacy. And speaking of breaking barriers, we can't forget the women who served in the military itself. The Women's Army Corps, the WAC, and those incredible women Air Force Service pilots, the Wei-Sand-Pi. They were pioneers.
They were.
What kind of roles did they fill?
They were doing everything from ferrying planes and towing targets to transporting cargo. It wasn't combat, but these roles were absolutely vital because they freed up male pilots for missions on the front lines. Imagine the skill and courage it took to fly those planes, knowing that any mistake could have disastrous consequences.
It's mind-blowing to think that while their husbands and brothers were fighting overseas, these women were back home risking their lives to support the war effort, and their service paved the way for women in the military today.
Right. Exactly. It was a stepping stone toward the full integration of women into all branches of the U.S. military, something we often take for granted today. But their journey wasn't easy, and it's important to remember the sacrifices they made to get us where we are now.
Speaking of struggles and sacrifices, let's talk about the experiences of African Americans during World War II. We all know about the continued segregation and discrimination they faced, but I'm curious to explore those incredible acts of heroism and the steps toward equality that happened during this time. Where do we even begin?
Well, the story of the Tuskegee Airmen is a great place to start. These were highly skilled Black pilots who trained at the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. And let me tell you, they faced discrimination at every turn. Imagine training to defend your country while being treated as second-class citizens in your own backyard.
I can't even imagine the kind of mental fortitude that must have taken to excel in the face of such blatant prejudice. It's inspiring and heartbreaking at the same time.
It is.
Tell me more about their story.
These pilots flew over 15,000 missions in Europe and North Africa, earning a stellar reputation for their skill and bravery.
Wow.
They proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that racist notions about their capabilities were utterly wrong. Their success directly challenged those deeply ingrained prejudices. In fact, their achievements played a key role in President Truman's decision to desegregate the military in 1948, which was a monumental turning point.
Wow, talk about a ripple effect.
Hmm.
So these brave pilots didn't just fight for their country overseas, they also helped to break down racial barriers back home.
Exactly. And that struggle continued on the home front as well. In 1941, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, which prohibited discrimination in defense industries. This was a huge deal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for the first time, Black Americans had a legal right to equal opportunity in jobs vital to the war effort.
That sounds like a major step forward. But we all know that laws on paper don't always translate to reality, right? I'm guessing there were still plenty of challenges for African Americans trying to make a living and build a life for themselves during this time.
You're absolutely right. While job opportunities increased, there was still a lot of discrimination in areas like housing and wages. This is where figures like A. Philip Randolph, a prominent civil rights leader, come into the picture. He wasn't afraid to challenge the government and demand real change.
I've heard that name, but can you refresh my memory on what he did?
Well, in 1941, Randolph threatened to organize a massive march on Washington to pressure the government to address these inequalities. It was a bold move, and it worked. While the march itself was called off after Roosevelt signed Executive Order 8802, Randolph's leadership sent a clear message. The fight for equality wasn't going away, not even during a world war.
That's incredible. So even while the country was united against a common enemy, the fight for social justice was already simmering beneath the surface. It makes you realize that the civil rights movement didn't just appear out of thin air in the 1960s. It had roots that went back decades to these early struggles during World War II.
You hit the nail on the head. The war was a catalyst for change, but the fight for equality was a long and arduous journey. And it wasn't limited to just women and African Americans. Hispanic Americans also played a vital role during the war, but their story is often overlooked. One key aspect of their experience is the Bracero Program. Have you heard of it?
Vaguely, but I'm definitely curious to learn more. I know it had something to do with Mexican laborers coming to the U.S., but can you explain the complexities and the lasting impact it had?
Think back to those labor shortages we talked about. The Bracero Program, which started in 1942, was a direct response to that need for workers, especially in agriculture and on the railroads. It brought thousands of Mexican laborers to the U.S. to fill those essential jobs.
So on the one hand, it sounds like it was essential to keeping the American economy running during a critical time, but I imagine it wasn't all sunshine and roses for the Bracero workers themselves. Was it as simple as them coming to work and then going back home when the war was over?
It was definitely a complicated situation. While the program did help keep the U.S. economy functioning, the Bracero workers often faced some pretty harsh realities.
Like what kinds of realities?
Well, they often faced exploitation, poor working conditions, and unfair wages, even though they were doing back-breaking labor. It's a classic example of a well-intentioned program with some pretty serious unintended consequences.
So even though it was supposed to be a temporary solution to a wartime problem, it sounds like the Bracero program had some long-lasting effects on the Hispanic community.
You're right, it did, both the positive aspects and the negative ones. The program's legacy, in all its complexity, really inspired future generations of activists. Figures like Cesar Chavez, who later led the fight for farm workers' rights, drew upon the Bracero experience to fuel their own movements for social justice.
That's really interesting. It just goes to show you how these seemingly temporary wartime policies can ripple outward and shape the course of history in ways people never anticipated. But I also want to make sure we don't forget the Hispanic Americans who served in the military during World War II.
Absolutely. Over 500,000 Hispanic Americans fought bravely, many serving in units like the Bushmasters, who were known for their incredible service in the Pacific Theater. What's so striking is that despite their patriotism and the sacrifices they made, many of these veterans returned home only to face continued discrimination.
That's just heartbreaking. To fight for your country, to put your life on the line, and then be denied basic rights and opportunities is simply unacceptable.
It is a real injustice, and this unfair treatment only fueled the fire for equality within the Hispanic community. Their sacrifices during the war became a rallying cry for the civil rights movements that followed. It's a reminder that the fight for a more just and equitable society is a continuous struggle, and that progress often comes at a high price.
Before we move on to Native Americans and the draft, let's pause for a second and take stock of what we've learned so far. What stands out to you about how World War II was reshaping American society? It's amazing to see how these seemingly separate stories are all connected.
It is fascinating to see how the war, while uniting the nation against a common enemy, also exposed the deep inequalities that existed within American society. It's a complex and often contradictory picture, and it's one that would continue to shape national conversations about race, gender, and equality for decades to come.
Absolutely. It's like the war was a giant spotlight, shining brightly on the issues that had been simmering beneath the surface for generations. Now, speaking of groups whose contributions were often overlooked, let's talk about Native Americans. I know they played a crucial role in the war effort, with over 25,000 serving in the military. But the story that really grabbed my attention is the Navajo code talkers. It sounds almost too incredible to be true.
It's one of those stories that really captures the imagination, isn't it? Picture this. In the heat of battle, with lives hanging in the balance, the outcome hinges on secret messages being transmitted across the Pacific Ocean. And what makes those messages unbreakable? The Navajo language.
Wait, they use their native language as a code. That's mind-blowing. How did that even work?
The Navajo language is incredibly complex with unique sounds and a grammatical structure that's very difficult to learn for non-native speakers. The Japanese were completely baffled by it. They had no idea what they were hearing, let alone how to break the code.
That's incredible. It's like something out of a spy movie. So these code talkers were literally on the front lines, helping to win key battles by using their language as a weapon.
They played a vital role in major battles like Iwo Jima, their contributions directly contributing to Allied victories. But despite their heroism and the critical importance of their work, they, like other minority groups, often faced discrimination and prejudice both within the military and when they returned home.
It's a stark reminder that even during a time of national unity and shared purpose, prejudice can still rear its ugly head. It makes you wonder if their wartime experiences fueled the fight for equality that would come later.
You're exactly right. Many Native Americans saw their wartime contributions as a way to assert their identity and their rightful place in American society. And their experiences during the war, both the positive and the negative, helped pave the way for the Red Power movement of the 1960s and 70s. It's a legacy that continues to inspire activism and advocacy for Native American rights today.
It's amazing to think about how these different threads of history intertwine and influence each other. Before we wrap up this incredible journey through World War II's social revolution, we need to talk about the draft. It was something that touched the lives of millions of American men, bringing them together from all walks of life. It must have had a profound impact on social dynamics back home.
The peacetime draft, which was enacted in 1940, was a truly transformative policy. It brought millions of men from all different racial and economic backgrounds into a shared experience unlike any other. Imagine being plucked from your everyday life, thrown into a rigorous training regimen, and then shipped off to fight in a war on the other side of the world. It was a crucible that tested their courage, resilience, and their ability to adapt to unimaginable circumstances.
I can only imagine the range of emotions and the mental and physical challenges they must have faced. But I'm also curious about how this experience shaped their views on society and their place in it, especially when it came to race relations.
That's a great question. While the military itself remained segregated for much of the war, the sheer scale of the draft meant that men from vastly different backgrounds were serving side by side, fighting for a common cause. This shared experience, though imperfect, had the potential to chip away at some of those social barriers.
So even within a segregated system, just the act of bringing people together from different walks of life could plant the seeds of change.
Exactly. It raises a fascinating question. Did the draft, despite its inherent flaws, actually act as a catalyst for social change? Did it challenge existing prejudices or simply reinforce them? It's something I'd like you to consider as we move forward.
That's a really thought-provoking question. We've covered so much ground today, from women shattering glass ceilings in the workforce to the incredible bravery of minority soldiers and the complexities of the draft. What's your big takeaway from this dive into World War II's unexpected social revolution?
I think the main takeaway is this. World War II wasn't just about battles, victories, and treaties. It was a period of intense social upheaval and transformation that profoundly reshaped American society.
Right.
The war exposed those deeply ingrained inequalities, but it also created unprecedented opportunities for progress. The contributions and sacrifices made by women and minorities laid the groundwork for the civil rights movements that would transform the nation in the decades that followed.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, the seeds of change are being sown, and it's a legacy that continues to resonate today.
Absolutely. We can see those echoes in today's social justice movements.
Wow.
The fight for gender equality, for racial justice, for the rights of all Americans, regardless of background, it all has roots in this period. It shows how interconnected history is and how the events of the past continue to shape the present.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we want to bring it back to you, the listener.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on all of this? What surprised you? What connections do you see between these wartime changes and the world we live in today?
We encourage you to reflect on these questions and to continue exploring the complexities of this era on your own, because understanding the past is essential to shaping a more just and equitable future for everyone. It's truly remarkable how these seemingly disparate threads of history intertwine and influence one another. It's like a giant tapestry where each individual story contributes to a much larger, more complex picture.
It makes you realize that history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about people, their experiences, and how those experiences shape the course of events.
Precisely. And one of the most powerful examples of that is the story of the Navajo code talkers. Here you have a group of Native Americans, many of whom had faced discrimination and prejudice throughout their lives, who suddenly find themselves playing a pivotal role in the war effort. And they do it by utilizing their unique cultural heritage, something that had often been seen as a disadvantage.
Such a powerful symbol of resilience and ingenuity. I mean, to take something that had been used to marginalize them and turn it into a weapon that helped win the war is just must have given them an incredible sense of pride.
Absolutely. It was a way for them to assert their identity, their value, and their rightful place in American society. And it challenged those deeply ingrained stereotypes about Native Americans that had persisted for far too long. But let's dive back into the specifics for a moment. Can you imagine being a young Navajo man suddenly thrust into the heart of the Pacific Theater, knowing that the lives of your fellow soldiers depended on your ability to accurately transmit these coded messages?
It must have been incredibly stressful talk about pressure. I mean, one wrong word, one mispronounced syllable could have had devastating consequences.
Exactly, and they did it all while facing the same dangers as everyone else on the front lines. They weren't just code talkers. They were soldiers facing enemy fire, enduring harsh conditions, witnessing the horrors of war firsthand.
It's a testament to their courage and dedication, not just to their country, but to their fellow soldiers as well. But even with all of that, they still weren't treated as equals when they returned home, were they?
Sadly, many of them came back to face the same discrimination and prejudice that they had endured before the war. It's a tragic reminder that even in times of national unity, deep-seated prejudices can persist.
It's heartbreaking, but it also speaks to the resilience of the Native American community.
Right.
Despite facing these obstacles, they continue to fight for their rights and for recognition of their contributions.
Right, and their experiences during the war played a significant role in shaping the Red Power movement of the 1960s and 70s. It was a movement that demanded self-determination, the recognition of treaty rights, and an end to the systemic discrimination that Native Americans had faced for centuries.
It's incredible how those wartime experiences, both positive and negative, helped to fuel this movement for social change.
Exactly. And it highlights how interconnected history truly is. The struggles of one generation often lay the groundwork for the progress of the next.
So we've talked about the experiences of women, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans during World War II, and we've seen how the war acted as a catalyst for social change, challenging traditional roles, exposing inequalities, and inspiring movements for equality that would continue for decades to come. But there's one more aspect of World War II that I think we need to explore, and that's the draft. It was something that touched the lives of millions of American men, bringing them together from all walks of life and fundamentally altering the fabric of American society.
The peacetime draft, enacted in 1940, was unlike anything America had ever seen before. It was a truly transformative policy that brought together men from all different racial, economic, and social backgrounds. Imagine being plucked from your everyday life, thrust into a rigorous training regimen, and then shipped off to fight in a war on the other side of the world, alongside people you'd never met before. It was a crucible that tested their courage, their resilience, and their ability to adapt to unimaginable circumstances.
It must have been an incredibly disorienting and challenging experience, but also a powerful bonding experience. To go through something like that together with people from such diverse backgrounds must have had a profound impact on their views of the world and their place in it.
Absolutely. And while the military itself remained segregated for much of the war, the sheer scale of the draft meant that men from different racial and ethnic groups were serving side by side, fighting for a common cause. This forced integration, though far from perfect, had the potential to chip away at those deeply ingrained social barriers that had divided American society for so long.
It's fascinating to think about the dynamics of those interactions here. You have young men many of whom had grown up in segregated communities, suddenly thrust into a situation where they were relying on each other for survival, facing the same dangers, experiencing the same horrors. It must have challenged their preconceived notions about race, and prejudice did it.
That's a great question, and it's one that historians continue to debate. While the draft didn't magically erase racism or prejudice, it did create opportunities for men from different backgrounds to interact in ways they never would have otherwise. They trained together, fought together, and in many cases formed bonds of friendship that transcended those societal divisions. And it's important to remember that those experiences didn't just stay on the battlefield. They carried those experiences back home with them. And those experiences had the potential to influence their communities and their families.
So even though the military itself was still segregated, those personal interactions could have had a ripple effect, slowly chipping away at those deeply ingrained prejudices and helping to pave the way for the civil rights movement that would come later.
Precisely. It's another example of how the war acted as a catalyst for social change, forcing America to confront its own contradictions and to begin to grapple with those deep-seated inequalities that had plagued the nation for so long.
It's a powerful reminder that progress isn't always linear. It often takes unexpected events, like a world war, to shake things up and create the conditions for change. But it also takes individual courage, resilience, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. And as we reflect on all that we've learned about this period, it's important to remember that the fight for equality is an ongoing process. The struggles and triumphs of those who came before us serve as both an inspiration and a challenge to continue the work of building a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this incredibly complex and fascinating period in American history. So much more to explore, so many more stories to uncover. What are some of the key takeaways you hope our listener will walk away with?
I think one of the most important takeaways is that history isn't just a collection of dates and facts. It's a living, breathing tapestry woven from the experiences of countless individuals. And those individual stories can often reveal profound truths about the forces that shape our world.
It's a reminder that we're all part of something much bigger than ourselves, and that our actions, both big and small, can have a lasting impact on the course of history.
Exactly. And as we continue to grapple with the challenges of the present, it's essential to draw upon the lessons of the past, to understand the complexities of those who came before us, to honor their struggles, and to learn from their triumphs.
We've talked about how World War II was a catalyst for social change, but we also have to acknowledge that many of the same issues we've discussed, issues of racial and gender equality, economic justice, and the rights of marginalized communities, are still being debated today.
You're absolutely right, and that's why it's so crucial to understand how we got here, to recognize the progress that's been made, but also to acknowledge the work that still needs to be done.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you, the listener, with this final thought. What will your role be in shaping the future? How will you draw upon the lessons of the past to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive?
The answers to those questions are yours to discover, but we encourage you to keep exploring, to keep questioning, and to keep striving to make a difference in your own unique way, because the fight for a more just and equitable world is a fight that we must all engage in together.
It's like we've been on this incredible journey through time, uncovering this hidden history that's often overshadowed by the battles and the politics of World War II. But these social changes are just as important, maybe even more so, because they've shaped who we are as a nation today.
Exactly. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, revealing these complex and interconnected stories that have shaped the very fabric of American society.
And it makes you realize that the fight for equality is an ongoing process, one that requires constant vigilance and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Think about the advancements women made during the war. They proved they could handle jobs that were previously considered men's work, but the fight for equal pay and opportunities continued long after the war ended, and even today we're still grappling with issues like gender discrimination and representation in leadership roles. What do you make of that?
It's a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line. There are setbacks and challenges along the way, but the important thing is to keep pushing forward, to keep fighting for what's right. And it's inspiring to see how the struggles of minority groups during the war echo in today's social justice movements.
Right. The fight against racial discrimination, for economic justice, for the full inclusion of all Americans, regardless of background, it all has roots in this period, and it shows us that these issues are deeply intertwined, that we can't address one without addressing the others.
It's like history is giving us this roadmap, showing us where we've been and pointing us towards where we still need to go. It's a call to action to learn from the past and to work towards a better future.
I completely agree. By understanding the complexities of the past, we gain a deeper appreciation for the challenges and opportunities of the present.
So to our listener, as we wrap up this deep dive into World War II's unexpected social revolution, we want to leave you with this. What will your role be in shaping the future? How will you use this newfound knowledge to make a difference in the world?
Remember, history isn't just something that happened in the past. It's a living, breathing story that we're all a part of, and each of us has the power to shape its course.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future. Tomorrow, we'll see you on our next deep dive.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.